Welcome to the 27th episode of The Smartest People in the Room. If you've been following this series, you understand what we are doing here. We shine a light on incredibly smart, accomplished people and help them share stories from their careers and lives, as well as anecdotes about their past, present, and future. And today we are taking it to a whole new level. Today I am thrilled to present two of really interesting people. One is a good friend of mine, Mr. Dick Huey, and one is one of my business heroes, Professor Scott Galloway. Believe me, guys, you are going to love this episode. Before we get started, let me take care of a little bit of business. First, to the audience, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat window. The reason we do these webinars is twofold. First, we want to showcase really smart people and the amazing work that they do day to day in business and in the music industry in particular. But the second reason is a little bit more nuanced. Some of you may know that I am a music industry headhunter. By definition and function, I help people connect with companies. So in this series, my goal is to help you make such connections, and I invite you to take full advantage of that opportunity. Specifically, I invite you to engage with the speakers and the other attendees in the chat of the Zoom. Please feel free to introduce yourselves, say hello to your friends, and make some new ones, and ask questions of our speakers. We will try to address as many of these along the way as possible. Before we get the program started, I want to thank our sponsors. I want to thank First Horizon Bank, Bufkin Baker, Four Roses Bourbon, the Fairlane Hotel, Core Power Yoga, the Tennessee Entertainment Commission, Lightning 100, Tennessee Brew Works, Moo TV, Jive Printing, Project Music, and also Organics. So let's get today's party started. Today's interviewer is a longtime friend of Who Knew, Mr. Dick Huey. Dick's 25-year music career includes management of several music artists, which led to a global head of digital role at an independent record label powerhouse called the Beggars Group in New York City. He's the founder of Toolshed, a digital strategy and music license acquisition consultancy. At Toolshed, he created digital campaigns for hundreds of critically acclaimed music artists and dozens of the world's top independent record labels. He led Spotify's US independent label license acquisition efforts prior to and during their 2011 US launch, and built consulting or advisory relationships with music clients including Red Bull, TuneCore, 8 Tracks, Jaxsta, Paper Chain, and Digital Rights Agency. He served on the board of Sound Exchange on behalf of Matador Records. He is a past executive director and board chair of the Future of Music Coalition in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Dick. And joining Dick today as our featured guest is Scott Galloway. Scott is professor of marketing at NYU's Stern School of Business and is a serial entrepreneur. In 2012, he was named one of the world's best business professors by Poets and Quants. He has founded 9 companies, including Profit, Red Envelope, L2, and Section 4. He is the best-selling author of The Four and The Algebra of Happiness, and has served on the boards of directors of the New York Times Company, Urban Outfitters, and Berkeley's Haas School of Business. His Prof G and Pivot podcasts called No Mercy, No Malice blog and Prof G YouTube channel reach millions of viewers each week. In 2020, Adweek named Pivot Business Podcast of the Year. Needless to say, we are thrilled to have both of these really smart guys grace our platform, so please welcome them. Take it away, guys.
Great, thanks, Tom, for the introduction. Appreciate that. And Scott, thank you once again so much for joining us today. Are you in chilly New York, or are you in a warmer climate somewhere?
No, I'm in desperately steamy Delray Beach, Florida.
I'm sorry to hear that. So let me start by actually expanding a little bit on the bio that Tom was nice enough to read a minute ago. It's possible that some of you on this call may not know Scott Galloway. And I'd say it's a fair question for this music industry centric audience to ask why we've got a non-music business person on Tom Truett's The Smartest Person in the Room event. So I'll get to that, but first, just by means of further introduction, Scott, I have to give you a couple more props. You've got a Vice News show. You're a regular contributor and commentator on shows as diverse as Anderson Cooper, Amanpour and Company, Fox Business News. Your Pivot podcast with Kara Swisher, who's a respected tech and digital writer and interviewer at the New York Times. You featured guests including TikTok interim CEO Vanessa Pappas and Dara Khosrowshahi, the CEO of Uber. And you're now almost 30 episodes into your own Prof G podcast, which has featured a host of brilliant minds from NYU, the educational and political world, and the world of business. You've started several companies, and you've experienced some spectacular successes and some flameouts. You're a father of 2 young preteen Gen Z boys in an age of social media, which is a challenge in itself. And you have a 90-year-old father of your own who's in the early stages of dementia, I'm sorry to say. But you've talked candidly and honestly about that in your best-selling book, The Algebra of Happiness, and we're going to discuss that today. That book is a personal tome for balancing your business life with your personal life. So, why Professor Scott Galloway at this event, and what's the connective tissue with the world of media? You, Scott, have done a TED Talk, as well as hundreds of other videos, including the very well-known and well-shared The Four Horsemen video, which highlights the exponential growth of Apple, Google, Facebook, and Amazon, all tech giants built on subscription, free or otherwise, that are valued at a multiple of revenues and can attract the world's most inexpensive growth capital. So this subscription thinking, that's red meat for those of us in the media business, because our digital revenue has nearly doubled in just over 10 years. Music was the canary in the coal mine. We experienced a transition from music as a product to music as a service, subscription service. And music has contributed to really incredible shareholder value from major music companies as well as from major tech companies, including Spotify, Amazon, Apple, and others. Although all boats don't float equally in this equation, as many artists would no doubt tell you. So that's the background. It's an incredible background. And I just want to I want to establish a quick baseline for the viewers to where you are now by going back to your origins. So tell me, where did you grow up? Tell me a little bit about your early life. You've often spoken about how UCLA provided you with an affordable public education. You and I both benefited from this in our respective state schools. You received a BA in economics, and that badge of completion set you up to sort of street hustle your way into your first job at Morgan Stanley, which you apparently hated. So I think that's a great lead in. Go for it.
So first off, thanks, Tom, and thanks, Dick. So curious, you said a state school. Where did you go to school, Dick?
University of Michigan.
Yeah, so second best public school in the nation. Yeah, great school. So look, you've given a lot of color on my background, and that my favorite topic is of course me. So I'm happy to expand on it. But yeah, look, son of a single immigrant mother who lived and died as secretary, product of big government, UCLA, the vision and generosity of the Regents of the University of California and California taxpayers, who gave me undergraduate degrees from UCLA and graduate degrees from Berkeley, are the reason I'm here speaking to you today. So I'm passionate about trying to ensure that unremarkable kids such as myself 30 years ago have the same opportunities now. I worry, I'll use your alma mater as an example. Most likely, you would not get into Michigan today if you applied. Michigan is now, I think Michigan, when you applied, probably had admittance rates of somewhere between 50 and 60%. And now it's probably somewhere in the mid-teens, meaning that it's literally 4 times as difficult to get into Michigan as it was in the 80s or the 90s. And the result is that while we all like to think that we and our children are exceptional, I can mathematically prove to us that 99% of our children are not in the top 1%. And the result is that the best universities today no longer have the latitude or the bandwidth or the capacity to provide unremarkable kids remarkable opportunities. And as you look at our society, it's largely, I think, become a caste system. We'd like to think it's a meritocracy. It's not. It's a caste system. And the slope of that casting, if you will, is whether or not you go to college. Only a third of Americans have college degrees, but 99% of people who are in positions of influence have a college degree. But not only if you have a college degree, but where you went to school. The kids coming out of Michigan are going to have salaries that are 20 to 50% higher than kids that come out of junior colleges in Michigan or schools that don't have the same brand as the Wolverines. And the result is that we have this kind of bifurcation in our society where the people who get to divide the spoils of the most remarkable economy in history come from largely two cohorts. The children of rich people. If you come from a household that's in the top 1%, you're 77 times more likely to get into an elite school such as Michigan, and also freakishly remarkable 15 to 17-year-olds who by the age of 16 have a patent, captain of the lacrosse team, and are also in AP honors everything. And the majority of us are not like that. So, my mission right now, in addition to being involved in education, is trying to figure out a way to substantially expand supply, admittance rates, and also lower costs such that we go back to where you and I were at Michigan or UCLA in the 80s and 90s. America has to fall back in love with the unremarkables, if you will. There's never been a better time to be remarkable in the United States. It's never been easier to be a billionaire. It's never been harder to be a millionaire. And I think that higher education has fallen into this drunken exclusivity where, and I'm guilty of this, as academics, we no longer see ourselves as public servants, but as luxury brands. Anyways, a bit of a rant around higher education, but as a means of wanting to know who I am, I'm a product of big government. I'm a product of the generosity of taxpayers in the University of California.
As am I, and you're right. Today, I might not get into college, not only or into the University of Michigan, not only because of the admittance rates, but just because of the cost. I also came from a middle class household, and it would have been a challenge. And the networking opportunities that came from being able to go to that school, I tell my kids all the time. I roomed with the man that became the future CEO of Domino's. I mean, that kind of a relationship just doesn't happen everywhere. So I hear what you're saying. I'm curious about, I guess I want to we'll come back to some of the education side of this, but I want to talk about your transition to a company founder. So you consult a number of music I consult a number of music tech startups, and that's why I'm interested in this specifically. But I'm particularly interested in hearing about what the spark was that got you started building your own string of companies. So you've often said that this happened, I think, right before you graduated or around the time you graduated, getting your MBA at Haas. I know you've founded 9 different firms. You've gone through a number of exits, some successful, some not. And we intersected over your current disruptive startup educational company, Section 4. So what took you from wannabe investment banker for a minute and then changed your mind to entrepreneur?
So look, I think that we have a tendency to romanticize entrepreneurship. And that is, we think of entrepreneurs as having this additional exceptional skill set. And I would argue that I'm like most entrepreneurs. The entrepreneurs that end up on CNBC, typically the profile is they went to Harvard, they dropped out, they went to work for a hedge fund, and they decided to start a company. That is not the storyline of most entrepreneurs. Most entrepreneurs are like myself, and that is, they're either excluded from the greatest wealth creating vehicle in the history of mankind, and that is the US corporation, or they just don't have, I wasn't excluded from it. My first job was at Morgan Stanley. I didn't have the skill set to navigate and be successful in a big company. Simply put, I was just too insecure. Every time people went into a conference room at Morgan Stanley, I assumed they were talking about me. I didn't respect authority. I assumed I was smarter and harder working than everybody, and I wasn't. I was arrogant, yet insecure at the same time. And I just wasn't going to thrive there. And I was smart enough to realize that I did not have the skills to be successful in a large organization. And a lot of kids come to my office hours at NYU and they say, I've got a job at Amazon or Google, but I'm thinking about starting my own company. I'm like, don't be a fucking idiot. Go to work for Amazon or Google. Because on a risk-adjusted basis, you're going to get rich at these places. You might get rich slowly. You might not be on CNBC, but you're going to get great health insurance. You'll probably meet your mate in the cafeteria. And if you decide at some point to start a business, you'll have the credibility and hopefully some wealth to start a company. So we have a tendency to romanticize entrepreneurship and thinking that people who end up starting companies do it because they're just too awesome for the corporate world. I started my company, as is I think the case for a lot of people, and that is I just didn't have the skills. I was fortunate enough that I had the credentials to go into a big company. A lot of people don't have the credentialing because big companies typically stop anyone without a BA, and the best companies stop people without a BA from an elite university at the door. It's almost an admittance requirement. And so I decided I wanted to be, and I needed to be, an entrepreneur. I started a firm my second year in business school called Profit. And it was a consulting firm, and I learned a lot, and then pivoted to e-commerce, and then decided I wanted to teach, but I've always started companies. And, people romanticize it, but be clear, if you have the skill set to work in a large organization, I would say go for it. That my stallmate at the age of 22 at Morgan Stanley stayed at Morgan Stanley, and 20 years later, he was vice chairman. And we got together, and we were very transparent about our ups and downs and our personal life and our financial situation. And we had ended up almost at the exact same position financially, but I got so lucky, and I had so much more stress, I think, than him. And, on a risk-adjusted basis, he just had a better path than me, because I almost a couple times ended up with zero and not able to recover. And fortunately, the moons lined up for me kind of later in life, but he had always had security. He had always had, I just think he slept better at night. He didn't get to go on CNBC as much as me, but I think it comes at a tremendous toll. So I think entrepreneurship as a whole is a bit overrated. We like to think we live in this innovation culture of entrepreneurship. There are half as many companies being formed every day as there were during the Carter administration, because the fastest growing areas in our economy, whether it's digital, social media, tech, computer hardware, are controlled by monopolies or duopolies. So the most lucrative places to start a business are generally the most anti-competitive. And so it is very difficult to start a business right now. I can't even imagine what a Vietnam it is to try and start a music business right now. My sense is all of the opportunity, or a lot of it, is being starched out by monopolies who have deep pockets. And basically everyone's starting a business, and I don't know if it's true in music, but in most industries where the monopolies have showed up, they're starting a business hoping to be acquired by a monopoly. They're not starting a business thinking it's going to be a great way to make a living over my life or go public. They're starting saying, I hope I find a niche such that one of these deep-pocketed players shows up and takes me out. So I think it's a very strange time for entrepreneurs. I've been exceptionally lucky. I've got, I've enjoyed it. It's been tremendously stressful. But when I'm speaking to young people, the natural assumption is that I'm going to tell them, just work hard and pursue your dreams and follow. You want to talk about shitty advice? The worst advice we get at NYU, the kids get. At NYU, and I apologize, I'm ranting right now. At NYU, we invite two types of speakers. We either invite people who are remarkably insightful and have domain expertise and credibility in their chosen field, or we invite billionaires. We've decided that billionaires just understand life. And billionaires give the worst piece of advice at the end of all of their talks. Not all, 2/3. And this is the following. Worst advice you can give a young person: follow your passion. That is the absolute most dangerous advice. Don't follow your passion. Do your passion on evenings and weekends. Find something you're really good at, and then spend 10,000 hours becoming great at it. And whatever that is, being great at it, the accoutrements of being great, whether it's a broader selection set of mates, being able to fly business class, or having people who work for you laugh at your jokes, even if you're not funny, whatever it is that you are great at, the accoutrements of being great will make you passionate about whatever that is. Tax accountants aren't passionate about tax law growing up. They're passionate about being successful. And so I cringe when people come to me and say, I'm not enjoying my job, so it must not be my passion. Well, guess what? Work is really fucking hard. And at some point, you are not going to enjoy it. That doesn't mean it's not your passion and you should get out of it. It's not the objective for young people isn't to find their passion. You can't hate what you're doing. You're never going to be great at anything you hate. But if you like it and you're good at it, put in the requisite time to become great at it. And trust me, anything you're great at will create an ecosystem of wonderful things around you such that you become passionate about it. Anyways, terrible advice, I think, following your passion. The passion businesses such as music, and I don't know this because I don't know your business as well, but generally speaking, film, music, restaurants, nightclubs, publishing are really shitty businesses in terms of a return on investment of your human and financial capital because they have an overabundance of investment. You want to be in fashion, unless your parents are rich, don't go into fashion because it's overinvested. You want to go into a restaurant, fine, you're going to make less money than everyone else and you're going to work 3 to 4 hours more per day because the passion fields are overinvested with human capital. And like any asset class, an overinvestment of human capital starches out the return. You want to be in software as a service for healthcare maintenance workers, something that sounds like so boring you want to put a gun in your mouth? That's where the money is. Asset classes, your return on your human capital will be inversely correlated to how sexy the industry is.
So I'm going to stop you here because I'm willing to bet, I don't know everybody that's in this, that's watching us today, but I am going to guess that half the people that are here, at least, might have had a similar situation to me. I got a book from my mom when I was a kid. Well, not a kid. I was probably 18 or 19. It was something along the lines of, do what you love and the money will follow us. Exactly what you said you probably shouldn't tell your kid. In my case, I just found that this is the thing I couldn't not do. And so I found the thing I loved and it turned into my passion. So and we have a lot of other people, I'm sure, today in the audience who were the same way. This music it became the only thing they could do, and they were so deep in it, they made it work, and they created a network around them. Anyway, back to you. And I think where I want to go at this point is to sort of switch gears to L2 and pull you into the music business a little bit. And when I say that, let me explain. So you founded L2 at the tail end of a recession. And you've often said, by the way, that founding businesses in a recession is the best time to found them. I think your successes have mostly come founding businesses in a recession. So that coincided the birth of your first son, as I understand it, and it sold in 2018 for a reported $134 million. So L2, that's Luxury Lab, and it was built around intellectual property that you developed called a digital IQ, which ranked companies' digital performance versus their peers who focused in the luxury industry. And this information clients eventually paid you for. So you morphed your consulting business, L2, from a flat fee into a recurring revenue subscription business model. And that's super interesting to all of us because of what's happened in music. So to make this transition, you evaluated companies that had sold for 5 to 10x revenues versus 1 to 2x revenues, and determined that there were 5 characteristics that were present in all the companies that had successful exits at a higher valuation. So I want you to tell us a little bit about the L2 experience, about those 5 characteristics. We'll see if you still remember them. I'm sure you do. And how your experience at L2 led you to write the best-selling book, The Four, The Hidden DNA of Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google, which is about extraordinary shareholder value being unlocked with the switch the business model to subscription. So run with that, please.
Sure. So I'd always been an entrepreneur and had done fairly well, and it was always just me. And I always had, you could always use more money, but I always had enough money to buy nice shoes, a big flat screen TV, and go to St. Bart's for the holidays. And that was and take care of my mom. And so I always thought, okay, I have what I need. And then, like a lot of people, I got run over by the Great Recession in 2008. And my oldest son had the poor judgment to come rotating out of my girlfriend at the same time. And for the first time in my life at the age of 40, I was totally freaked out. Because when you have a kid, you realize it's no longer about you. It's no longer like if it's just you and things are going well, you can sleep on a friend's couch and kind of figure it out. But once you have a kid, that's when it really hit me that I needed to get much more serious about economic security. And I found myself in a position where I just didn't think I would be at the age of 40, because up until that point, I'd been very lucky and had been kind of pulled up in the draft of the digital age with e-commerce companies and lost most of it. I mean, a couple of things happened. The Great Recession and in 2000, anyways, I just ended up where I didn't want to be. And so I got this, I'm a very data-driven guy, and I got a study from Deloitte, and they had looked at every private market transaction or acquisition of a private company. And they chunked every company into deciles based on the multiple of revenues it got sold for. And they looked at the top decile, the tropes, the companies that got sold for 8 to 12 times revenues, when typically companies get sold between 1 and 3 times revenues. So my first company, Profit, I got to 10 million in sales, and I sold it for 2.8 times revenues, or 28 million, which I think I sold at the age of 32, was a lot of money for me at the time. But I thought, okay, this time I want to start a company that gets 8 to 12 times revenues. And this study found that the common attributes across those companies that had sold for anomalous multiples had a few things in common. One, they own niches. They were very specific in the category they were addressing. They had technology at the core, they had recurring revenue, they had defensible IP, and they were international. And so I said, okay, I understand data. I'm going to create a series of crawlers and software programs that can go out and grab 1,200 data points across a brand's digital footprint, across its site, traffic, engagement, usage, bounce rates, digital marketing, there's search key terms, presence on social media, mobile, how strong their interface was on a mobile phone. I looked at all these things, collected 1,200 data points, and used technology to collect it prospectively across the 1,000 biggest brands globally, luxury brands, because I saw that luxury was booming and there wasn't a lot of academic research. So we had technology, we had a niche, we had luxury. I patterned it as a recurring revenue. You sign up and pay a yearly fee and get access to your data, and then we put a layer of consulting on top of it. Events, opened a London office, so we were international sooner than most companies. I opened a London office when we were only about 12 people. And then ultimately, 7 years later, sold it for 8 times revenues, or 9 times revenues. So I kind of hit that. And entrepreneurs will always say, oh, I don't think about exit. I was thinking about exit from day one. And maybe that's the wrong way to look at it, but I was thinking about it initially. So it ended up being, kind of got it all right, but I was very methodical and disciplined about it. The 4 for me was, my dean called me at NYU, and I've been teaching for the last 20 years, and said, you really need to write a book. If you want to be taken seriously as an academic, you either need to do peer review research or you need to write a book. And I thought peer review research is irrelevant. I think it's mostly a giant circle jerk for academics to get their colleagues to publish shit in journals that we then buy that has almost no relevance. I just couldn't see myself writing peer review research. And by the way, some of it changes the world. Occasionally there's a piece of peer review research that results in a vaccine. Some of it changes the world. 99% of what I've read in my field in marketing has almost zero relevance. So I decided I would I'd write a book. And I'm in love with these 4 companies, or at least I was. And I thought I really want to understand them. And so the book started out as a love letter. And I spent the better part of 2 years of my life researching and writing about these 4 companies, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google. And what started as a love letter turned into a cautionary tale. And that is, the more I got to know these companies, the more monopoly abuse I saw, the more tax avoidance I saw, the more lack of respect or regard for our youth in terms of teen depression, the more radicalization of young men, the more incredible self-harm of young girls that they were cognizant of but weren't putting in safeguards, the more lack of safeguards to weaponize our democracy, the more obvious it was they knew these algorithms fomented rage as a means of creating engagement and more ads. And by the time I was done writing the book, I decided I was going to try and spend a great deal of my attention and resources to educating the media and elected officials around the dangers of these companies. And I got very lucky. The book got published 3 years ago, just as the worm was turning. People don't remember. 3 years ago, the only argument about big tech was which CEO was going to run for president and who was more awesome, Sheryl Sandberg or Jeff Bezos. It was just, these were our heroes. And these companies, everyone wanted to work for them. Everyone wanted to invest in them. And it's been a real interesting journey. But yeah, initially it started out as academic research or a means of trying to get more academic credibility. Started as a love letter. And the more I found out about these companies, the more sort of concerned / horrified I became.
Great story. Okay, so lots of connective tissue to our business right now, to our music business. I'll try to do a smooth, easy entry into our crazy business of music, which I think pretty much everybody here would agree with. You know, we're an amalgamation of record labels and publishers and distributors, artist managers, retail, touring companies, and of course artists, many of which are some of which are in the viewing us today. But all of those sort of core elements surrounded by concentric layers of the onion, so to speak. So this would be device manufacturers, and then maybe music services and others. And, you know, we've been disrupted across the industry several times in only the last 20 years, which is pretty remarkable. And, you know, first by the unbundling of the album, which was courtesy of Steve Jobs, and then by subscription music services. So, you know, I guess I'd like to get your take on where the media industry and related services and companies in this space might be headed now, and what players will need to do to survive and grow, because we've got companies of all different sizes that are probably watching this today.
So I'm not as familiar with the music industry as I'd like to be on this podcast, but there's some general trends in media, which I do follow, which I think are applicable. And the first is there's a consolidation of power. These ecosystems are becoming less and less robust. And that is fewer and fewer people are reaping more and more of the spoils, right? So the 1% of working actors, there's like a 98 or 99% employment rate. And then within that 1%, there's 10 actors who are soaking up 40% of the total compensation for U.S. motion picture film releases. My sense is the same thing is happening in terms of the globalization and network effects of music, that there's fewer and fewer people making more and more money. What's interesting about media is that it's been featureized. Now, what do I mean by that? And that is the media industry in and amongst itself used to be a great industry and profitable. Takes in $20 or $30 billion a year between music, motion pictures, television, and makes between $2 and $6 billion in profits. And then the big tech guys who are worth between $500 billion and $2 trillion saw media as a means of creating emotional resonance among their franchises, because media creates higher NPS scores, and said, I'm going to come in and I'm not going to use this as a core business, but I'm going to use it as a point of differentiation so I can sell more paper towels or handsets, and made these staggering investments in content and distribution that traditional players just can't keep pace with. So Apple comes in. Spotify is a superior music service to Apple. I have both Apple Music and Spotify. Spotify is hands down better. Apple has periods of growth in the US where it's growing faster despite having a shittier service, because they own the rails and they can tax Spotify 30%, meaning that Spotify can be more creative, they can be better. They're still over time going to lose. It's like if two boxers are in a ring and one's getting 100% pure oxygen and the other's getting 70% pure oxygen, the guy getting 70% can be a better puncher, a better hitter. Eventually, he's going to go down. And that's what's happening, is that Amazon has come into the media space. And other than Amazon and Netflix, any traditional producer of original scripted television over time is probably going to go out of business. And so we've ended up with a situation where in the 80s, when the Chinese steel industry tried to consolidate the US industry by selling steel for below its production costs as a means of putting people out of business, when Amazon shows up or Apple shows up and dumps music or leverages the fact that they own the rails, we don't call it dumping or anti-competitive behavior, we call it innovation. Because as consumers, we like getting Amazon Music for free, or I like getting Apple Music for free when it just shows up on my app. So I think there's a very dangerous trend in America where we've let these monopoly companies run unfettered and overrun industries. And it's starting in media. I think the media industry has been featureized. I don't see them. It's very difficult to operate a business as a standalone business. I could tell traditional media players in music or the movies, they could be remarkably innovative if they could lose 20 cents on the dollar. It's not that they don't get it. It's not that they don't understand technology. But when you're Amazon and you can sell $1 worth of goods for 93 cents, or you're Spotify, even with their deep pockets, or you're now competing against Amazon or Apple, there's just it's very hard to find niches and cracks where you can create a self-sustaining business. I think what's nice or interesting about music is there's been so much money that's poured into it. It feels to me that Spotify is more of a cooperative than a business that is, in fact, paying artists 120 cents on the dollar they get. So I imagine that's a sugar high. But I don't think the movie ends well. I think we're moving towards a series. I think Netflix is going to acquire Spotify. That's what I would do if I were Reed Hastings. I think with their market capitalization and Spotify getting kicked in the nuts by a monopoly called Apple, eventually Spotify will, I think, sell to Netflix. And then you're basically going to have a small number of players who are kind of dictating who gets access to what content. And I think that's bad for the ecosystem. I think we have a very unhealthy economy right now with a small number of players who control a disproportionate amount of the power. And it hasn't been as bad in television and music as it has been, for example, in print media. I was on the board of the New York Times, and the first thing I said when I was on the board was like, we got to shut off Google. What are we doing? And instead we didn't. And now 50% of newspapers are out of business. There are 40% less journalists covering corruption at City Hall than there used to be. There are more PR executives that are at Facebook than there are reporters in the Washington Post newsroom. Bezos has more full-time lobbyists in DC than there are sitting US senators. So I think these companies have literally overrun Washington. I think they abuse their monopoly power. And while we admire it, and there's always these really well-publicized examples of content creators that punch through and live a fat life, the reality is the industry as a whole in media is sick. It's not diverse. The ecosystem is not robust. It's not diversified. And we end up with fewer and fewer players who make the jump to light speed, who get magnificently wealthy, and the rest, everybody else is kind of left fighting over the crumbs. So I think it's become a winner-take-all Hunger Games-like environment, and I think it's unhealthy. And people are under the impression, because they might know someone who got wealthy at Spotify or at Google, they think that the economy is doing better. I don't. I think it's a very unhealthy kind of K-shaped economy where if you get into the thin line of the upward extension of the K, good for you, and those people will get a ton of press. But the thick line is the one going down, where it's more and more difficult to make a living in the world of media.
Mm-hmm. So this built-in product and service advantage that Amazon and Apple have, just to rephrase a little bit of what you said. So despite that, Spotify at the moment looks like it's winning the race as an early mover in music streaming. It sounds to me like what you're saying is even with that, it's not sustainable. I'm curious, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but what a Netflix Spotify merger would deliver. What does that look like to you? Why is there synergy there? What's the connective tissue that you think is exciting, interesting? Is that a moat, or does that build a moat that makes Spotify a player in the long term, or Spotify and Netflix a player in the long term?
The recurring revenue bundles, or as I call them, rundles, whether it's Netflix or Amazon, they're not consumer offerings, they're IQ tests. You don't choose to have Amazon Prime. It means you have a credit card. Amazon has a monogamous relationship with 82% of US households in the form of Amazon Prime. So more households have Amazon Prime than own a gun or attend church. I think those are probably the same people, or have a pet or decorate a Christmas tree, vote in the 2016 election. You don't choose to have Netflix. It means you have a credit card. Yeah. So, and to offer that kind of bundle at that price, you realize Apple right now is offering $1 billion, $1.6 billion of content for every dollar a month that you spend. It's $5 a month, and in exchange for that, you get $8 billion of original content. So even the most talented storytellers in the world, or most talented executives in the world, Jeffrey Katzenberg and Meg Whitman, show up with $1.6 billion, and it's like pissing in the ocean. They show up to a howitzer fight with a squirt gun. I mean, that Quibi is dead on arrival. And Spotify, amazing service, fantastic technology, visionary, got herded all the cats that I can't imagine the egos in your industry managed to figure out a way to get something done. They had the cheap capital
Good
of
stuff.
they had the cheap capital and the visionary investor of a former Facebook executive. They got early momentum. And I don't think they're sustainable as an individual company. I think eventually they'll sell to Netflix. What is it about Netflix? Netflix becomes the ultimate subscription bundle if it has music and video. I just think they could charge 15, 19, 24 bucks of $24.99. And they basically become, they become the filter through which almost all music and original scripted television content goes through. And they develop a disproportionate amount of power. I not only don't think that shouldn't happen, I think a lot of these companies should be broken up. I think Apple should be regulated. I don't think there's any reason people should be paying a 30% tax for a service if they're offering a competing service. You just can't win. So, but yeah, Netflix and Spotify from a consumer level in the short run would be very compelling, I think.
Will you do a real quick for these 4 companies that we're talking about, Apple, Amazon, Google, and Facebook, you've talked about ideas for how you would break them up, given the option to do so. Just real quick, go through each one of them. What needs to be split out? What would unring this bell?
Well, right now it's Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google. I'd have Amazon, AWS, Amazon Fulfillment, Google, YouTube, Google Cloud, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and I don't think you can break up Apple. I think you regulate it because elegant antitrust. I'm a capitalist. I think the best antitrust is the one similar to when they broke up the phone companies. Within 10 years, all 7 of those companies that used to be one company were worth more than the original company. So Apple's difficult to understand how you'd break it up because the core asset there is the brand. And it was like, who would get licensed to the brand? So I think Apple's a case of regulation, but I think 4 companies turn into 10. And the moment Google and YouTube are split up, in the first corporate strategy meeting of YouTube, they say, you know what? We need to differentiate it. I know, let's produce text-based search. And Google, as an independent company without YouTube, says, I know, let's go into video search. And overnight, you have competition. And Google Video might say, I got an idea. If we want to get more P&G ad dollars, maybe we try and make the requisite investment such that Scott Galloway's 9-year-old doesn't type in Harry Potter nude and get hardcore porn within 2 clicks. I know, says Google, says YouTube video or text-based search. Maybe when someone types in, how do I overthrow the government, the first search return should be a voter registration form and not instructions how to build a dirty bomb. The demand for a more ethical platform is there. But right now, the guy who's buying ads from Procter & Gamble or Unilever or General Motors doesn't have any choice. So these monopolies don't have any incentive to make the requisite investments that the Washington Post makes in ensuring that, okay, hey, who bought that ad? They paid for in rubles. Should we look into that? Someone is buying ads encouraging Black martial artists to host classes, to encouraging Black people to take up violence against white people. And they paid for the ad in rubles. Should we check that out? No, we'd rather have an algorithm that just cashes their check because no one's watching and no one cares, or no one has the power to hold us accountable. So I think competition solves a lot of those problems. A lot of people think it's regulation. A lot of people think it's changing our laws or antitrust laws. A lot of people think it should be criminal prosecution. I'm not sure any of this gets better until there's a perp walk. The algebra of disincentive here is all screwed up. I'll give you an example. I think if any of you get a call from a coach at UCLA saying, hey, give me $100,000 and send me a picture of your kid rowing and I'll get him into UCLA, I think you hang up the phone. I think nobody wants to be Aunt Becky right now doing a perp walk. But if you're in big tech, if you're Apple and you forget to send the technology update to Spotify, or if you make it difficult for anybody to charge within an app, have their own payment system, if they want to charge 12% on additional video games instead of 30%, like, no, we're not going to allow that. That anti-competitive behavior, there's no downside to it right now. There's no disincentive. Facebook potentially perverted our democracy, and they end up with a $5 billion fine. They were worth $500 billion. If I showed up to your house, Dick, and said, okay, Dick is worth, you look like a successful guy, Dick is worth $10 million. If I said, I want 1% of your net worth or 100 grand in exchange for indemnifying you against anything you've done wrong, you'd say, okay, where do I sign the check? There you go. Here you go. So the FTC, our regulatory bodies, have transitioned from being a countervailing force against private power to a co-conspirator, which, if you look through history, is a key step to tyranny. So I think the algebra of disincentive is all messed up here. And that is, we have to start, if there's a parking meter in front of Tom's house that costs $100 every 15 minutes, but the ticket costs 25 cents, Tom's going to break the law. And so we have basically said to these guys, you should keep breaking the law, because there really isn't much of a downside. And the downside, if it's a $5 billion fine in your Facebook, that's 11 weeks of cash flow or 11 days, of top line revenue. So we need to dramatically rethink our governance and how we hold these firms to the same standards we've held other firms.
So this is a great lead in to the next question I want to ask you. And it's one that you've talked about recently several times. And that's the advertising business at the core of several of these huge companies. So many of them, actually, many of the ones that the music industry is directly involved in, YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, all of them have advertising somewhere at their core. And, I guess I want to talk about advertising versus subscription. You've talked about trying to right the ship by encouraging a move, and I use the word encouraging in quotes because I need to really talk about what encouraging means, but encouraging those businesses to shift from advertising to subscription by whatever means possible. What would that bring? Why would that make a difference? What would that change?
Well, first off, so the advertising industrial complex is just collapsing because the reality is advertising sucks. And, if advertising has become a tax that the technologically illiterate or the poor have to endure. If you have any money, it means you no longer have to watch advertising. My favorite show is Modern Family, and the notion that for every 9 minutes I have to endure two minutes of ads telling me that I need a treatment for my opioid-induced constipation, or that I need to buy a South Korean car or a shitty light beer. None of those have any relevance to me. The notion that, and then, by the way, ABC gets 49 cents for pelting me with 8 or 9 minutes of non-relevant crap called advertising, which means effectively, and they get a higher CPM than almost any broadcast television show. It means that effectively they're saying my time's worth $3 an hour. So the majority of us have the income and now have the technology to opt out of the advertising industrial complex. So ad-supported media is literally collapsing. And then the place it's all aggregating where it works is where you have the scale of the Super Bowl every day, plus the targeting of direct mail, and that's called Google or Facebook. And those companies are just sucking the oxygen out of the room for anyone. Google and Facebook are going to go from 60 cents on the dollar of digital marketing, and they're going to come out of COVID with 80 cents. So if you're in an ad-supported business and it's not called Amazon, Facebook, or Google, and you're under the age of 40, get the fuck out of Dodge. You are in a horrible business that is going down 2 to 3% a year. It won't go away. It's just going to be a shitty place to work or invest for the next 10 years. People are moving to a subscription model. People with any money are like, if you just let your kid watch Netflix and not broadcast television, not ad-supported television, your kid saves 2 weeks a year in just watching ads. 2 weeks a year. And so the move from advertising to subscription is just undeniable.
And what about, let me stop you for 1 second. Let me stop you for a second. So broaden that a little bit and talk about the move from advertising to subscription and the impact that would have on the toxicity and our conversations with each other. And you have young kids, how likely they are to be glued to a screen. Can you talk about that too?
So there's a couple of things there, and you brought up a key point. The ad supported. So if you think about social media is nicotine, and that it's addictive, but it doesn't give you cancer. The thing that gives you cancer is the business model, the ad supported model, and that is because it's advertising driven. It means the more engagement they get on Facebook or on Instagram, the more Nissan ads they can serve you. And the algorithms, which are indifferent, they're not concerned with our well-being, they're not concerned with our democracy, have figured out that the best way to get engagement is to delight people with ads on cats or Kanye or whatever it might be, and also to enrage them. We're a very tribal species. We like seeing confirmation bias. We like seeing people and ideologies we don't like embarrassed or humiliated. And immediately the algorithm begins sensing if you're left or you're right, and then starts serving you content that takes you further right, further left, polarizes you, and then pits people against each other and creates this rage machine. I'm addicted to Twitter. After this podcast, I will go on here because I am desperate for self-affirmation, and 90% of it will probably be positive, and 10%, including some of the comments in here from some idiot in your podcast, is saying, oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about. And that enrages me, but it makes me addicted to this. That is not healthy for our economy. And the reason why, rather, we're having a somewhat of a civil debate around these important issues is the underlying business model wants rage. It wants rage. So it creates the underlying ad model with algorithmically driven advertising, creates rage and dissension. Netflix has not been weaponized by a foreign government. You haven't seen HBO tear at the fabric of our society.
Nope.
So subscription-based models tend to be, in my opinion, more benign and less damaging to our society. In addition, what you get as a business when you move from an ad-based model to a subscription-based model, ad-based models are the equivalent of serial dating. And serial dating is expensive and hard. It means trying to look good. It means working out. It means getting shitty drunk so you have confidence. It means hangovers. It means not being as good at what you do. Monogamy, the way households create wealth is they decide to partner with somebody else and they focus on a household and they build economic wealth. The same is true in business. When you enter into a monogamous relationship with your consumer in the form of a subscription business, you can better plan out your CapEx. When a recession hits, people are much less likely to cancel Netflix as an advertiser is to pull some ads off of ABC during the months during COVID because they have to cut costs. So as a result, the marketplace values companies that are in a monogamous relationship with their consumer at a multiple of revenues. Companies that are in a transactional ad-supported business model get valued at a multiple of EBITDA. So the most accretive thing you can do in your business, no matter what business you're in, is to try and figure out a way to move to a monogamous business relationship. So the ad model, in my opinion, when it's algorithmically driven, is bad for society. It plays on our worst instincts. And at the same time, a move to subscription creates a much greater multiple. So you're seeing an enormous transition of human capital, financial and human, from an ad-driven model to a subscription-based model.
That's super interesting. I could talk about that for the rest of the podcast, but I have some other questions I want to ask you. So in a recent Pivot podcast, I want to talk about smaller business because I know we have smaller businesses who are watching this today, not just directly in the music industry, but in some of the concentric circles of the onion. So in one of your recent Pivot podcasts, you said, I should say, you talked about what you would have said to the CEOs of the four major multinational tech giants that testified recently before Congress at the end of August. So you said small business formations at a multi-decade low. The fastest growing sectors receive scant funding from investors. Why should someone invest in a search engine right now, or a music streaming business, or a social media platform, or an e-commerce firm, given the sizes of your companies? You're now talking to the heads of the four large companies that are sitting in front of you. So tell me, what I mean, you've hinted at this, but I want you to go a little deeper in it. What's your view 5 to 10 years out for startups, in particular for non-subscription based startups? Is there a future for them? How do these companies get bigger?
Well, look, so I would never, being an entrepreneur, I think it's a little bit like being a doctor. Over the last 30 years, being a doctor has transitioned from the guy or gal with the biggest house who gets to play golf on Wednesday to just a very difficult job that involves a lot of debt. But some people are born and they have to be doctors. We all had someone in the neighborhood who was taking your temperature and playing doctor, and they've just known their whole life they have to be a doctor, and they're just going to be a doctor. And I think the same is entrepreneurship. If you are cursed to be an entrepreneur, then knock yourself out and go for it, regardless regardless of the ecosystem. And the craziest thing is we have this tax structure where we give tax breaks to an entrepreneur. When I sold L2, I got my first $10 million in proceeds at zero tax. That makes no sense. That makes no sense. That's just fucking the middle class, such that the wealthiest cohort in America, small business owners, can continue to get richer. I didn't start a business because I knew the tax rates. I mean, it's just so ridiculous that entrepreneurs start businesses based on the ecosystem or tax rates. Anyways, I think small and medium-sized businesses, one, I think as a citizen, you need to vote and actively lobby for the breakup of big tech and monopoly power. Monopolies are bad for the ecosystem. America has a proud legacy of when companies become too powerful, of breaking them up. And I don't think the people running these companies are bad people, except for Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg. They are sociopaths, and she is lipstick on cancer. But for the most part, and I know most of them, the rest are decent people doing their level best. They're not at fault. We're at fault for not holding them accountable, for not electing leaders with the backbone to apply the same antitrust scrutiny on these companies as we've applied to traditional industries. If you're a small and medium-sized business person, it's all situational. I don't know enough. You have to look at the specific businesses. What I would say is the same thing has always been true. Throw around nickels like they're manhole covers. Try and find a core group of people that are key. Give them equity ownership stakes in the business. Work your ass off. Balance is a myth. It's like a child that's at least initially needs constant supervision all the time. Being an entrepreneur is hard, and these things look, smell, and feel like you. You become irrationally passionate, attached to them. But I think it has never been harder to start a successful business. I'm not here with a message of hope. I think until we oxygenate the ecosystem by breaking these guys up, and not only that, I think the same is true, and I don't know enough about this, and maybe you can comment on it, but my sense is the music industry has digressed to a small number of labels that are way too powerful. I think it's happened in every industry. Antitrust concerns aren't really just about big tech. They're also big pharma. They're big ag. Big agriculture has got way too much power. I can't get wireless. There's monopolies. I'm having trouble getting wireless in Delray Beach, Florida. And I think, my God, and I have one choice in terms of a wireless provider. Anyways, I don't feel like I have enough domain expertise around startups in the music industry to comment thoughtfully on it, other than I think our ecosystem needs oxygenation through really aggressive antitrust.
Well, I appreciate that. And I don't want to interject too many of my own opinions here, but I'm a huge fan. Anybody who knows me on this podcast knows I'm a huge fan of small brands, of small business. I think they're massively important filters, and I'm rarely a supporter of further consolidation in music. So we're definitely on the same page, at least from that perspective. But that's actually a really good lead-in. This lead-in of starting a new business into what you're doing now, and that's where I want to transition to now. So I want to talk about your educational disruptive business section 4, which I am particularly fascinated by because you're launching it at the same time you're actually working in the industry for a school of higher learning, NYU. You work in the same industry you're trying to disrupt. So you've spoken extensively about higher ed taking the mother of all shots to the chin, I think were your words, with COVID's disruption. And I'm going to let you dig into that in a minute. I want to just draw a little bit of connective tissue that, the intersection between your work, running Section 4, and why I'm interviewing you today, is really very much focused around your brand strategy sprint. So I was an attendee at your NYU Winners and Losers event in January, and you announced afterwards that you were starting this brand strategy sprint, and I think I signed up for it before I had gotten out of the room. And I sort of jumped at this opportunity, not only to take a class that you were involved in, but also to learn a pretty specific strategy and action plan to convert companies who haven't made this transition from unit sales to subscription. I just found that really interesting. And because that happened in my industry, obviously. And I came on board as a contract TA. And after being a TA in a couple classes for you, I'm now TAing your second brand analysis class, which is a shortened version of your far less expensive version, I should say, of your NYU Master's Brand Strategy class. So just real quick, I did all this because I wanted concrete tools and knowledge to analyze brand strength and business models for my own consulting company, which I feel like I've gotten in spades. And I also wanted to have the opportunity not just to look at my industry, but to get in discussions with executives and network with people outside my industry about recurring revenue bundles in sports and whatever else. And I've been able to do that too. And that's been an unexpected and real pleasure for me. But the last thing, really most important thing, and maybe this will sync with the thoughts of some of the people here, is I don't have an MBA, and many in my network do, and I'm getting older. And an MBA, in my perspective, is about getting a certificate that that lets you through the door, so to speak. But it's also about advancing your knowledge and getting a more in-depth look at business operations and growth. And I've realized that Section 4 is a way to do that in 2 to 3 week chunks that I can do while I'm continuing to run and optimize my business. So I've said enough about this, about why I enjoy what I'm doing in conjunction with Section 4. And I want you to talk about your goal for Section 4, which as I understand it, is a place where people come to learn, not just to take a course from you. So I love the idea of a through line or a thread of some kind that's focused on personal enrichment and improvement. Can you just talk about that, your plans at Section 4, and unpack it a little bit for us?
Thanks, Dick. And first off, when I initially heard about this podcast, I said, we don't have time. And they said, but Dick's one of our GSIs, what we call our TA. So I'm here because of you. And thanks for your kind words, and thanks for being great or helping us. It's super easy to credit your grit and your talent with your success and blame the markets for your failures. Education changed my life, full stop. And I've always wanted to expand the opportunities. And right now at NYU, I teach on Tuesday nights, from 6:30 to 9:30 p.m., 280 kids, and each of those kids pays $7,000. That's $1.96 million for me doing this for 12 nights. Now, granted, my agent takes a 98% commission, but that's just not sustainable, and it's not ethical either. The majority of those funds are paid for in debt, which means these kids can't get married as soon as they'd like. They can't form households. They can't take risks on business. They walk around with debt. And what did Michigan cost you when you went? Do you remember were you in?
Yeah, it was probably $5,000 or $6,000 a year in tuition.
Okay. UCLA, when I went, I'm older than you, it sounds like, was $1,200 a year. And Berkeley, a top 20, now a top 10 MBA, was $2,000 a year. And I couldn't have started a business without those. I would have had too much debt. I wouldn't have been able to start a business. I've gone on, I'd like to think, been a productive citizen. So access to affordable education, I think, is a national mandate. And I feel as if I feel as if millions of households are screaming out to academics and business people saying, hey, Scott, hey, Dick, you got these incredible opportunities. How about us, boss?
Yeah.
There is spring, and parents too. Spring used to be this joyous but nervous time of, are you going to Michigan, or are you going to University of Wisconsin, or maybe you go to Indiana? Maybe Michigan's your dream school, but you get into a good state school somewhere. Now it's a season of despair. It's sitting down. Most kids do not get into the schools they want. University of Colorado Boulder used to be a safety school when I went. Now it's considered a really difficult school to get into because
that was my safety school.
The number of applications keeps going up, and we, drunk on exclusivity, love. The dean of my school of NYU gets up and says, we rejected 88% of applicants, and they say that with pride, which in my mind, that's tantamount to the head of a housing shelter boasting that he turned away 9 in 10 people who showed up last night.
Right.
We should be in the business of providing more opportunities to people, not providing less so we feel more proud of ourselves. So we think we're awesome because our degree is getting more and more prestigious. So I've said, okay, I want to expand learning. I don't have the credentials or the accreditation to provide certification yet, but I thought, what if I could take my class that people pay $7,000 for and provide 50 to 70% of it? I can't provide you the certification. I can provide you some of the networking, because on Slack, we try and get people together for coffees in different cities. And now we've had about 5,000 people take the class. So we have a critical mass to get the people in London together. That I can get you 70 or 80% of the learning, the constructs, the models, and I'll do it in a crunch format in 3 weeks instead of 12. And I'll charge you $850 instead of 7,000. And the other thing we do in a nod to the University of California is we have a scholarship program, and it's a stringent process. To take my class for free, you have to send me an email saying I can't afford it. And we don't ask anything more, and we let you take the class for free. And about between 10 and 20% of every class are people on scholarship. So we have to find, there has to be dramatic disruption in this space. There has to be, the fists of stone have to meet the chin and the exclusivity of higher ed that has taken place in our society. We have become rapacious in terms of our fees. Tuition has gone up 1,400% in the last 30 years. People complain about healthcare. Education costs have risen faster than healthcare costs. So we've basically said to America, you either need to be rich or freakishly remarkable to get higher ed. We need a dramatic rethinking of higher education. And I hope we're a part of that. I'm not trying to virtue signal too much. It's a venture-backed company. I hope we make money here.
Yep.
But I think there's big opportunity to supply 50. If you think about the fastest growing retail companies in history, Southwest Airlines, Old Navy, fastest 0 to a billion airline and retailer, the algorithm was pretty straightforward. 70 to 80% of the leader, 70% of Delta for 50% of the price. Old Navy was 80% of the Gap for 50% of the price. I'm trying to give you, or my students, 50 to 80% of my $7,000 class for 10% of the price. And you're right, it's no certification, it's learning. The majority of our students are in their 30s or 40s, and people who think, I didn't have access to an MBA, I don't have time to go get an MBA, give me kind of the core concepts. Give me maybe some of the networking, but give me the principles of an elite university instructor at a fraction of the cost. Because most people, if you think about it, the total enrollment across the top 20 business schools is about 8,000 people. That's nothing. And the cost to go to NYU or Wharton or Stanford or Haas right now, all in, if you take out the opportunity costs of giving up your job, is somewhere between $300,000 and $500,000.
Yeah,
that's insane.
Yeah,
that's just insane. Who can do that? So how do we move back incrementally? And that's what we're trying to do at Section 4. We have our second class product strategy with Adam Alter, who wins Best Professor every year at NYU. We have another professor teaching platform strategy coming out of Kellogg. We have a fantastic woman joining our faculty from UNC Flagler. So look, I want to move. I want to figure out a way over time to get corporations to sponsor it so I can go to zero tuition. I'd like to think someday university costs get flipped, where corporations, which have record profits, pay to recruit at these schools, and students get to go for free. And we use a mix of small and big tech to double or treble the enrollments. I'm working with the Regents of the University of California, and I'm saying, okay, if we take 50% of our classes online, we can double the admissions rate, because we have to make it easier. The kids who used to get into UCLA now don't get into SC. That's a bit of a UCLA joke. They get into Pepperdine, or they end up at SMC. They don't get nearly the access to the quality of education that you and I got. And we got to turn back the clock. We got to go back to loving the unremarkable. So anyways, Section 4 for me, it's a profit-making venture, I hope, sometime. I've raised a bunch of money from venture capitalists, but the basic algorithm is 10% of the cost of an elite university elective, and hopefully 50 to 70% of the value. But we'll see. So far, we're off to a good start.
I think that's great to hear, and I'm with you. I put 3 girls through college. Just have my last one in college right now, so right there at the finish line, more or less. And it was just insanely expensive. It's it's my second and third mortgage, really. Incredible. But all right, I I wish we had twice the time to do this, but I want to center in on the last piece of this. And this is actually one of my favorite pieces of Scott Galloway, which is you and your best-selling book, The Algebra of Happiness. So I reread the book last night, and it reminded me that this is also the name of one of the classes that you offer at NYU to your brand students, and that it's the most popular class. And I loved a number of things that you said about it. I think you described the class in your book as an examination of success, love, and the definition of a life well lived. And a video that you produced on this topic on YouTube has over 1 million views, I've heard. You talk about your 2 boys. You talk about your mother and growing up in a lower income household, single mother. And you talk about your aging father. This choice for your follow-up book, business book to The Four, apparently was quite a surprise content-wise when you presented it to your publisher, or so you said. I love the book because my wife and I made a choice to move our family to a farm in the middle of starting my business. And I thought I wanted to raise my kids in nature, and I wanted to be present in their lives, and was blessed to be able to do that and have business at the same time. So you've got a lot of epiphanies in this. Some of my favorites are that you love unconditionally when it comes to your family. You said nobody ever says at a funeral he was too generous, too kind, and much too loving, which I love. So tell us a little bit about this book, about what made you want to write it, what made you want to talk about balancing your family's needs. You can talk about it during COVID or otherwise, your desire to start new businesses. How did you articulate all of this and condense all of this into a tome that really reads quick and fast and is just really solid with lots of little gems of knowledge?
Yeah, so again, Dick, I think you're being generous, but so I'll just start off by saying thank you. The Algebra of Happiness for me there's kind of a dirty secret in book publishing. So I wrote The Four. It's better to be lucky than it is good. And it was just as society was starting to get nervous about big tech. My book came out and it did really well, especially for an academic. And my book publisher said, okay, we got to write another one. I said, well, I don't have a vision for the next one. They're like, it doesn't matter. We just need to get everything out because the pump is primed.
Yeah. And
I came back and I said, all right, I have a vision for a book. I've written most of it. And like, great. And they're like, what's it called? I'm like, The Algebra of Happiness. And they're like, no. Like, write the 5, call Sheryl Sandberg a liar, write about Apple, whatever, but don't self-help, algebra, happiness. And I said, look, this is what I want to write about. And the motivation for the book is very simple. It probably comes as no surprise listening to me rant and curse. I struggle with anger and mild depression, and I have most of my adult life. And the moment I had where I decided to write the book, or at least start researching happiness, was about 3 years ago. I speak to my sister every Sunday night, and I was complaining, and she said basically, Scott, why are you so angry all the fucking time? You have less justification to be angry than anyone I know, and you're always angry and upset. And I thought, and I really thought about it. My mood is here. My blessings are here. And I thought I need to take a data-driven approach and a cognitive behavior approach to figuring out how to bring this in line with this. And it is really a blessing, just a treasure trove of research on happiness. And so I set about trying to read every study, every piece of academic research, every book on the subject of happiness, and try and articulate a series of equations and mathematic principles around living kind of your best life. And that is, everybody has ups and downs. The question is, how can you get the ups and downs on a higher level such that the downs are more manageable and the highs burn a little bit brighter? And that was what the book is about. So it's really been a self-exploration for me to try and address some of my issues. But it's been really enjoyable as an adult male, an adult heterosexual male that has always had trouble expressing my emotions to the people I love. I grew up in a household where affection wasn't really something that was around a lot. And I think one of the mistakes we make as males in our society is we see affection and love as a currency. and that if we give it up, it somehow diminishes something that we have. And what I've tried to be much better at, as a lot of the studies talk about, the happiest people aren't the ones who are loved the most. They live rewarding lives, but the happiest people are the ones that know that everyone in their lives know that they love them immensely. And so, even just that hack, trying to mind the gap, we make a mistake as males, believing that people are telepathic, believing that if we love them, that they know that. And so, a quick cognitive behavior. Every time I think of something good about a friend, about my spouse, about my kids, I try to express it verbally or physically. And that's difficult for me. It's difficult for me to tell my friends I admire them or I think they're impressive. That's just not what I'm used to as a male. It's difficult for me to admire and express affection as often as I should to my wife and my kids. It just doesn't come naturally to me. But this is a means of recognizing more enjoyment, because the grand study, the largest study, if there is a definitive study on happiness, has a very basic conclusion. And that is, the happiest people are, do they feel respected and admired at work? And just as importantly, do they respect and admire other people?
Sure.
Amongst their friends, do they get a sense of joy and camaraderie from them? But also, do they know their friends get a sense of joy and camaraderie from you? And most importantly, at home, do you feel an intense level of love and support? And again, just as importantly, do you know they are intensely loved and supported by you? And it's a 400-page academic study. It followed a bunch of dudes at Harvard from the age of 19 until they all died 80 years later. And it's got absolutely the greatest opening line of any academic study. And it's the following. It's the first sentence is, happiness is love, full stop. And so I've just tried to get much better at expressing my emotions and practicing. And I have a series of ratios. I think the percentage of time you watch, the percentage of time you spend sweating watching other people sweat is a forward-looking indicator of your happiness. Show me somebody who spends Sundays. Show me someone who spends Sunday watching football and playing golf, and Tuesdays and Thursdays and Friday nights watching ESPN and doesn't sweat. I'll show you a future of failed relationships and anger. Show me someone who's at SoulCycle, CrossFit, and uses sports as a means of establishing relationships and never watches sports alone, and I'll show you someone who's good at life. Fortune 500 CEOs, the thing that's most common about them, other than they're usually white dudes, but the second most common feature is that they work out every day. Not that they went to great schools, not even that they went to college. So I just have a series of equations around known best practices for living a rewarding life. And it's purely a selfish venture, as I wanted to bring this in line with this.
I love that. Scott, thank you for this. I'm going to, Tom, I know you have some questions, and I want to leave a little time for questions here. So, Tom, I'm going to let you take it away and offer some questions from the audience.
Well, thank you, Scott. I could sit here for 3 more hours listening to this. It's been just absolutely riveting. But I do have one question. I want to go back to some of the stuff we talked about earlier. First off, the social dilemma. You saw it, no doubt. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I know, Tristan, these companies are very good at figuring out how to get you addicted. I know I'm addicted. Personally, I'm addicted to Twitter. And if you think about it, and going back to happiness, if you think about it, what's also important is 6 of the 10 happiest countries in the world are in Northern Europe. And you sort of think, well, what are they good at? And what they're good at is, in America, we have a tendency to think that happiness is correlated with getting something. And what they found is that happiness, in large degree, is associated with an absence of fear of having things taken away. So in most Northern European countries, if your wife is diagnosed with lung cancer, it's not like the US, where that 40% of you, after hearing that news, it means that within 36 months, you're going to go bankrupt. They have an absence of fear from financial disaster, from healthcare. They have an absence of fear about being able to get their kids into a reasonable school at a reasonable price. They have an absence of fear from being homeless. And a lot of people would say, that's not the right system. America is about huge upside and huge downside. But this notion of an absence of fear from something bad happening to you is, you know, is hugely, I mean, it's hugely important. I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? I started ranting and I forgot what you asked me.
Well, it's about the social dilemma. And
Oh, okay. So
is
you
it
want to talk
real?
about where I was headed with it. Thank you for that. You're bringing me back. We in the US, you want to talk about something. Do you have kids, Tom?
I do. A 23-year-old and a junior at Fordham, one of the most expensive schools in the
And
country.
a junior at Fordham. Okay. So everybody knows if you bucket your life, you have your world of work, you have your world of friends, you have your world of hobbies, and you have your world of kids. All of this can be going great. If something comes off the tracks with one of your kids, all of this does not matter. It just does not matter. And the biggest threat to our kids right now, and the biggest threats to our happiness as parents with school age or college age children, is this emerging mental health crisis. And my colleague at NYU, Jonathan Haidt, has written a book called The Coddling of American Mind, which is wonderful. We have a 30% increase in suicide among young men. We have an 80% increased suicide rate among young girls, and we have a 120% increase in hospital admittances among young girls engaging in self-harm. And it's a function of two things. The first is it's our fault. The first is concierge and bulldozer parenting, and that is parents now use so many sanitary wipes on their children's lives, they no longer develop their own immunities. We see it at NYU. A freshman shows up, their parents have managed this incredible bulldozer manicured life for them, and they show up, they can't deal with the competition, they can't handle getting their heart broken, and they absolutely freak out. And unfortunately, a lot of school administrators have unwittingly turned into mental health counselors. The other thing we have done is that boys, and why it's so especially hard on girls, boys bully physically and verbally, girls bully relationally. And with phones and social media platforms, we have put nuclear weapons in the hands of teenage girls, where they no longer they no longer just don't get invited to the party. They see it play out in real time on their Instagram feed while they're alone in a dark room. And so we've ended up with this terrible cocktail of kids who don't have the same resilience, suffer from this princess and the pea syndrome, and then we barrage them with incredibly self-esteem defeating media platforms. And the result is we've seen teen suicide and self-harm skyrocket. I think that is, if you are economically secure, if you like what you do, if you're in a good relationship with your wife, the asteroid or the meteor that can hit your life is something coming off the tracks with one of your teen kids. So I think figuring out a way to deprogram. I'm very concerned about Robinhood. I followed the story of a kid named Alex Kearns who got into online trading. Young men love to gamble. They love to tickle those sensors. A lot of them are home for the first time. There are now more young men living at home between the ages of 18 and 30 than living on their own. They get a $1,200 stimulus check. They go onto a Robinhood account. They lever it up to $5,000, and they start buying Tesla and Apple. And that's probably the reason Apple's trading at 37 times earnings, and Tesla's worth more than the next three biggest car companies combined. But anyways, this kid got a memo thinking he was down, or a screen alert thinking he was down $700,000, decided that he was in over his head. He saw no way out and literally threw himself in front of a train. And what I see happening at Robinhood is what happened at Instagram. And that is a total prioritization of blitzscaling and growth and shareholder value over the well-being of our boys. And so I've been very loud in trying to aggressively get involved with legislatures, and also highlight that Robinhood has lost the script, and these people are opting for money over the well-being of our boys. But I think we need to look at the addictive nature of these items and understand the downside, and then either fine these companies for not deprogramming these addictive features. I don't know if you've been on Robinhood, but between the confetti and the gamification, you can see how it starts to, like a video game, addict you, except the downside isn't losing at Fortnite. The downside is thinking you're economically ruined at the age of 20. So I think a lot about addiction. I think that Social Dilemma is a great work. I think Tristan Harris is a gift to society. So I'm a big fan of it, and I'm glad you enjoyed it and you're bringing it up.
Right. It's frightening, and I've turned a lot of people onto it. So Listen, I regret this, but we are out of time. And I just want to say thank you to Dick for bringing us Scott Galloway. Scott, as I said in my opening, you have been one of my business heroes for a long time.
Thank you.
And I know from the audience today, you've gained a lot of new disciples, a lot of folks from the music industry that previously had never been subscribers of yours, I have a feeling are now going to become that. So we appreciate all your opinions. Please keep fighting the good fight. And to everyone else out there, please stay healthy. Please vote on November 3rd. And with that, I am signing off. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, gentlemen.
Thanks all.